Imagine watching my whole family toast a gift of $15 million to my brother on stage. I was the invisible daughter, and with one sentence, I made them realize nothing they had was truly theirs anymore. I waited for the applause to peak, then calmly took the microphone. "You can't give what you don't own, Dad." It was the precise moment the years of calculated betrayal and fraud began to unravel before dozens of witnesses. My name is Riley Sharp. I'm 34 years old, and that morning I slid my laptop open on the worn marble counter of my favorite coffee spot in Portland's Pearl District. The mid-morning Saturday quiet here was a curated silence, the kind where the low hum of productivity was only broken by the hiss of the espresso machine and the faint tapping of keyboards. She was supposed to be reviewing the Cone strategy brief for her agency, where she managed content strategy, but a giant 2-gigabyte file was creeping its way to her desktop. A necessary distraction presented itself in the form of Instagram. I sipped my black coffee, the bitterness a familiar and welcome shock, and began to scroll. Just a quick mindless flip through the timeline until the file finished downloading. It was the same routine I'd maintained for years. Carve out a few quiet weekend hours to stay ahead, a habit ingrained from years of juggling multiple roles. The first story that popped up wasn't from a client or a colleague. It was from a mutual connection, someone I barely knew, a 20-something girl who worked at a tech startup downtown. The image was grainy but instantly recognizable. A rooftop patio strung with hundreds of twinkling fairy lights. In the center, under the Portland skyline, stood my brother, Ethan Sharp, in a crisp black tuxedo, his arms wrapped around a blonde woman in a stunning low-cut white wedding gown. They were kissing. My heart didn't flutter. It simply seized, missing a beat with a hollow, nauseating thud. The caption was a cascade of emojis, a diamond ring, a white heart, 2 champagne glasses, and the damning hashtag, "Lydia says I do." I zoomed in, then zoomed out again, my fingers clumsy against the trackpad. The background confirmed it. The familiar, misty gray silhouette of the city, the bridges I crossed every day. This wasn't an engagement shoot. This was clearly a wedding that had just happened, likely last night, given the twilight lighting. A cold, clinical calm washed over me, the kind of focus I usually reserved for handling a client crisis. I clicked the profile and scrolled rapidly through the mutual's album. There they were. The ring exchange, the choreographed first dance, the moment the knife plunged into the towering white cake, and the family photos, a smiling, perfectly arranged tableau of the bride's parents, her siblings, her beaming friends, bridesmaids in matching silk dresses, groomsmen raising a toast, every single person who mattered. But in the 37 photos I reviewed, I was absolutely, totally absent. I was not a groomsman. I was not a guest. I was not even a distant aunt. I minimized the browser and opened my private message thread with Ethan. The history stretched back months, a monotonous, transactional timeline. My last message, sent just 3 days ago. "Did you remember to send the $285 for the car insurance premium? I transferred the money to your checking account last week." Before that, a reminder about his student loan forbearance application. Before that, a link to an open position at a rival tech firm. Before that, "Your rent money is in the bank." Not a single word, not a hint, not a typo about meeting a tailor or finalizing a guest list. My gaze snapped back to the screen. Lydia Marcel. The name clicked. I'd scrolled past her account a dozen times. An aspiring lifestyle and wellness influencer who peddled smoothies and 10-step morning routines. I navigated straight to her page, scrolling past the perfectly filtered images of avocado toast and yoga poses, and there it was, laid bare for her 70,000 followers, a meticulously curated saga of the last 3 months, the countdown stories, the ecstatic try-on videos in various bridal boutiques, the rustic chic engagement shoot set against a Pacific Northwest forest backdrop. I had seen them all, scrolled past them all, dismissed them as generic content. Now, they were a meticulous public record of my exclusion. The coffee shop suddenly felt less like a quiet sanctuary and more like a cramped, glass-walled observation tank. The easy chatter of the couples around me, talking about weekend plans and overseas trips, sounded distant, muffled, like listening to conversations underwater. I was Riley Sharp, successful, financially independent, a woman who controlled million-dollar marketing budgets, yet right here, right now, I felt like the loneliest person in a city of 650,000 people, watching the story of my own family unfold through the eyes of a stranger. I had been 34 years old, and I had been completely, utterly erased. I shoved the laptop aside, ignoring the 3% left on the file download, and grabbed my phone. My hands were steady, unnervingly so. This wasn't grief yet. It was pure, unadulterated adrenaline and cold fury. I called Ethan. The first call went straight to voicemail. The cheerful recording of his voice telling me to leave a message. I hung up immediately. The second, the third, the fourth, fifth, and sixth, each one an escalating assault against my composure. The quiet fury was starting to boil, threatening to shatter the glass of the coffee cup. I could feel the eyes of the barista resting on me, but I didn't care. On the seventh try, the call connected. I heard the distinctive sound of a party winding down in the background, clinking glass, a distant thump of music, and then a click. It wasn't Ethan's familiar, slightly panicked greeting. It was Lydia. Her voice was flat, cool, and precise, a tone she probably practiced for her sponsored ad reads. "Hello? Where is Ethan? This is Riley," I stated, my voice low and dangerously even. There was a pause, a moment of perfect silence where she deliberately measured her response. I could practically see her perfect influencer smile tightening. "He's busy right now. Riley," she used my name like a mild insult. "Busy? Lydia, I need to know why I found out about my brother's wedding from an Instagram story. I need an explanation." She didn't offer one. She didn't apologize. She didn't even bother with a flimsy lie about a small ceremony or an oversight. Instead, she drove the knife in, twisting it with practiced ease. "I didn't want you in the pictures. You're pathetic. Look at you, still living your life around his problems. We are starting fresh, a new brand, a new chapter, and you, Riley, you are not going to be part of the aesthetic." The words were so blunt, so utterly contemptuous, they momentarily stole my breath. I managed one final question, one last desperate reach for the brother I had effectively raised for 15 years. "Does Ethan know you're saying this? Does he agree?" Her reply was a final, cold door slamming in my face. "He is standing right here. He agrees with me. You should just let go." In that single brutal sentence, all my sacrifice, the missed college degree, the double shifts, the endless financial transfers, the years spent being his rock, was dismissed, reduced to a single word: pathetic. The cold ceramic mug in my hand felt heavy, meaningless. I hung up the phone. I didn't even say goodbye. I sat there, watching the screen of my dead phone, the loud, insistent silence in my ears. I didn't cry. I just felt a crystalline clarity descend, a feeling that was colder and far more dangerous than rage. I had been foolish enough to let my identity be defined by the role of savior sister. They had just made it clear that they no longer wanted a savior. They wanted an absence. And I decided, in that moment, to give them exactly that. I would not only let go, but I would also remove every single thing that had allowed them to stand up and walk away. Everything. The memory returns like the nauseating jolt of a flash photo. The harsh, fluorescent lighting of the hospital waiting room. I was 21, reeling from the news that the crumpled steel on Interstate 5 had claimed both my parents. The world had just ended. But the bills, the mortgage, the electricity, the future, had already started their relentless ticking. Ethan, then just 13, was curled up on a hard blue plastic chair, his little league baseball backpack still clutched in his lap. He hadn't cried. He just looked up at me, his eyes huge and terrified, and asked the question that instantly rearranged the entire course of my life. Where are we going to live now? There was no answer I could give him then, only an unshakable certainty. We had cousins, an aunt in Arizona, people who would have taken him in, people who would have let the state step in and handle the paperwork, but I knew, deep down in my bones, that I could not let my brother vanish into the foster care system, becoming another statistic, another kid shuffling between strange houses, another story lost to bureaucracy. I vowed, silently, to keep him in our story, no matter the cost. The cost was immediate and brutal. I dropped out of the University of Oregon, just 3 semesters shy of my degree. The financial aid was instantly revoked. The textbooks were sold back for pennies on the dollar, and the promising future I had mapped out for myself in corporate communications evaporated like steam off a hot sidewalk. I plunged straight into the Portland grind, taking on 2 non-negotiable jobs. The morning shift started at 5 a.m. at a specialty coffee roaster near the industrial blocks, the kind of place that smelled permanently of burnt sugar and stale beans. Then, I'd clock in at 4 p.m. at a massive, impersonal distribution warehouse near Gresham, stacking boxes until my arms shook and my feet screamed, often not getting home until well past midnight. We moved out of our childhood home, a place of too many memories and too high a mortgage, and settled for a tiny, run-down duplex in a less than desirable neighborhood. Just outside the radius of the good school districts, the rent was cheap, which meant the walls were paper-thin. In the long, damp Portland winters, the ancient gas furnace rattled and hissed like a dying animal, barely keeping the chill off the worn carpet. I remember stacking blankets on Ethan's bed, trying to create a cozy corner amidst the constant noise and the smell of mildew. Every night, no matter how exhausted, I made sure there was a cooked meal. It wasn't gourmet. It was usually budget-friendly chili or pasta, but it was served on actual plates, at a small, wobbly kitchen table, under a bare bulb. This was my attempt to anchor him, to say, "We are still a family. This is still home." I carved out a small, quiet corner for him to do his homework, always emphasizing that his education was the only way out, the finish line we were both running toward. My own education became a silent, solitary pursuit in the dead of night. After the dishes were done and Ethan was asleep, I'd load up cheap or free online marketing courses on my battered laptop. I taught myself SEO, content strategy, and digital analytics, often working through modules until 2 or 3 in the morning, fueled by cold coffee and pure necessity. My study station was the tiny laundry nook, where the constant whir of the washing machine was the soundtrack to my ambition. Next to me, sometimes, Ethan would stir. Sometimes I would look over and see him slumped over his advanced calculus textbook, already asleep. Year after year, I slowly, reluctantly transitioned from being his older sister to being his guardian, his provider, his reluctant parent. My life was a steady stream of legal and financial obligations. I was the one sitting in the stiff chairs during parent-teacher conferences, the one signing the permission slips, the one filling out the interminable FAFSA forms for his college applications, documenting our poverty in excruciating detail. Every piece of official correspondence, from the IRS to the school nurse, listed Riley Sharp as the legal custodian. When Ethan finally received his acceptance letter for the software engineering program at a solid university in Portland, I collapsed against the kitchen counter and wept, not from sadness, but from a profound exhaustion that finally felt redeemed. That acceptance was my degree, my diploma, the culmination of 7 years of absolute self-neglect. I felt like we had achieved it together, a shared diploma forged in double shifts and sleepless nights. My next focus was giving him stability. I knew that a dorm room or a sketchy shared house would be an obstacle to his success. I needed a permanent base for him. So, at 28, I leveraged every single penny I had saved, secured a promotion that paid me just enough, and qualified for a 30-year mortgage to buy a small townhouse in Beaverton, a clean, safe suburb that was still a reasonable commute to his campus. The title was entirely in my name. I paid the down payment. I paid the closing costs. I was the sole borrower. I let Ethan live there, charging him only a symbolic rent, enough to cover the utilities and give him a sense of minor responsibility, but nowhere near the actual monthly payment. It was his home, built entirely on my credit, my income, and my sacrifice. Beyond the brick and mortar, there was a deeper, long-term dream. I started a dedicated savings account, which I internally nicknamed the Europe Tech Fund, every month. I quietly funneled money into it. It wasn't for a house or a car. It was for the day Ethan finished his degree, the day he could afford a summer abroad, a short course at a European tech hub, the kind of opportunity I had lost. It was the future I never got to have, a gift waiting for him when he was ready to accept it. I knew, though, that this endless giving was a heavy blanket, a suffocating weight. Sometimes, exhausted after a long day of navigating corporate politics and then coming home to review his budget, the words would slip out, unintended, corrosive, but true. I missed my own college graduation because of you. It was never a request for gratitude, but an expression of profound fatigue. Yet, every time I said it, I could see it land on him, a tiny, invisible layer of emotional debt settling onto his shoulders. That phrase. I missed my own college graduation because of you, created an unspoken obligation, a financial and emotional umbilical cord that neither of us had ever learned to cut cleanly. It was the foundation of our entire relationship, a silent contract that was about to be unilaterally and violently terminated. The first subtle tremor in the foundation occurred about 18 months ago. So slight, I barely registered it as anything more than a youthful distraction. I had driven out to the Beaverton townhouse one damp Tuesday evening. A takeout container of decent Thai food, a small celebratory extravagance, tucked safely on the passenger seat. Ethan met me at the door, genuinely smiling, smelling faintly of clean laundry and code. He was flipping pancakes for dinner, despite it being a Tuesday, a peculiar habit he'd picked up. He was beaming, a relaxed, happy look I hadn't seen on his face since he was a kid. "She's great." "Riley," he said, stirring the batter with unusual enthusiasm. "Her name is Lydia Marcel. She's a content creator, and she lives right over by the Willamette River. She's special." I remember just smiling, genuinely pleased, and shrugging it off. As long as she's good to you, that's all that matters. I was used to Ethan's fleeting interests. He was 26 then, navigating the confusing landscape of young professional dating. I dropped the subject, settling down on the sofa to catch up on a soccer game, fully intending to head back to Portland proper before 10 p.m. I ended up falling asleep, the fatigue of my own 60-hour workweek finally claiming me, simply assuming this was just another passing, uncomplicated romance. I was wrong. Lydia was the complicated factor, a disruption disguised as a lifestyle upgrade. The first time I met her, she was already setting up shop in my living room. I arrived unannounced one Sunday afternoon, bearing groceries and a new air filter. The townhouse, which I had purchased and furnished with the cheapest functional pieces I could find, was unrecognizable. In the middle of the living room, near the small bay window, was a professional-grade silver tripod, a massive circular ring light blazing with the intensity of a small sun, and a backdrop draped perfectly. Lydia, impossibly blonde and wearing athleisure that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill, was talking animatedly into a camera phone. She waved a perfectly manicured hand at me. "One sec, babe. Just wrapping up this segment for the channel." Then, I heard the words that made me pause, the takeout bag suddenly heavy in my hands. "So excited for this new chapter. Moving in with my man. It's our home now." The caption she later posted was even more definitive. "Moving in with my man. New chapter." Followed by a stream of emojis and the phrase, "Our little Portland sanctuary." I felt a faint prickle of unease. Sanctuary? I still paid 80% of the mortgage and was the only person on the deed. Later, over a dinner that Lydia had meticulously styled for a quick snap, color-coded vegetables and perfect cutlery, she started interrogating me about the house. The mortgage here must be killer, right, Riley? Beaverton's getting so pricey. Ethan is so smart to have been able to handle a place like this on his own. He's really built something from nothing. Her tone was full of flattering praise for Ethan, but her eyes, flat and observant, were entirely on me. I remember correcting her instinctively, a small, involuntary reflex. Oh, no. The mortgage is definitely heavy, but it's in my name. I bought it a few years back, before Ethan finished school, so he'd have a stable place to launch his career. He just covers the bills, mostly. Lydia's smile didn't falter, but a tiny, predatory gleam flashed across her eyes, a micro-expression of sudden, sharp interest. She just laughed, a light, dismissive sound, and turned her attention back to her perfectly arranged food. That was the seed. From that point on, my property became her primary content backdrop. The small, functional townhouse that represented years of my late-night labor was transformed into the ultimate prop for the Lydia Marcel lifestyle. The kitchen, the patio, the small, slightly overgrown balcony, they were all featured daily, always labeled with the possessive pronoun, our home, our little haven, the house we built from the ground up. I would watch these video clips on Instagram, a creeping sense of violation washing over me. The very foundation I had worked double shifts to secure, the debt I carried in my name, was being casually rebranded as the ultimate luxury accessory for a woman's personal brand. My years of financial insecurity and sacrifice were being monetized as her aspirational couple goal. It felt grotesquely unfair, like watching a stranger wear my most valuable heirloom to a costume party. My precious, low-key sister-brother nights quickly became extinct. If I came over, Lydia was always present. More disturbingly, she was always performing. The ring light was always on, the camera perpetually rolling. Every casual conversation, every shared laugh, was framed and captured, ready to be edited into a seamless, enviable story. I found myself censoring my advice, my serious questions about Ethan's future, knowing they'd be inappropriate for the happy couple narrative she was constantly filming. The escalation continued, slowly and deliberately. One evening, as we finished a glass of wine, the expensive kind Lydia insisted on keeping, not the cheap stuff I usually bought, she brought up the topic again, this time with a veneer of playful suggestion. You know, Riley, you really should just transfer the deed to Ethan now that we're talking about getting serious. She paused, batting her eyelashes playfully at him. I mean, it's just better optics. For a man, you know? It's not very aspirational for him to be living in his older sister's investment property. A man needs to own his space. Ethan, who had been laughing at something on his phone, suddenly looked up. He didn't object. He just gave a small, nervous laugh and said, "Yeah, I mean, eventually. That's the plan, right, Riley?" The comment hit me like a physical blow, a sudden constriction in my throat. I couldn't swallow. I couldn't speak. In that moment, I understood her game completely. Lydia wasn't interested in Ethan. She was interested in owning the stability I had paid for. She was subtly, expertly working to redefine who the real builder of this life was. My purchase, my mortgage, my sacrifice, all were being recontextualized as a temporary handout that should now, logically, be surrendered to the real adult in the room, the man who needed to look good. Despite the growing alarm bell ringing in my mind, I swallowed the fear, reverting to my default position. The self-sacrificing sister. He is happy. He is finally settled. I told myself I could handle being pushed into the background, that losing a little bit of credit was worth it if it meant Ethan was finally thriving. Fine, I told myself, trying to justify the sinking feeling. If I have to be the silent partner, the invisible bank, so be it. I never imagined that this small, seemingly acceptable loss of status was merely the opening gambit, a tiny, initial concession that would soon lead to my entire identity being stripped away and violently discarded. It was a Trojan horse, and I had foolishly dragged it right into the sanctuary I had built. The rewriting of history began subtly, woven into the fabric of Lydia's online narrative. The crushing revelation hit me one afternoon while I was eating a late lunch at my desk. I was idly watching a recorded Q&A session she'd posted on her channel. Something mundane about balancing a career and a relationship. Then I heard it. Lydia, leaning conspiratorially into the camera, her tone warm and earnest, said, "My man, Ethan, he grew up tough, you know? But he's completely self-made. He worked his butt off and bought this house all by himself. Nobody handed him anything." I froze, the fork halfway to my mouth. Nobody handed him anything. The phrase rang in my ears like a lie told in a church. I felt a chill run down my spine, a realization that she wasn't just claiming the house as theirs. She was actively erasing the 15 years I had spent raising him, the $450,000 I had poured into his future. I was the nobody who had handed him everything, and now I was being wiped from the story. The subtle gaslighting accelerated in our personal lives. Ethan, once eager for our weekly catch-up lunches, started canceling with increasing frequency. The excuses were always the same, and always related to Lydia's burgeoning career. "Sorry, Riley, I have to film a 3-hour brand deal segment with Lydia." Or, "I can't today. We're shooting content for her followers. It's a huge event." My time, the time I carved out despite my senior role, was consistently deemed less important than her carefully curated image. When I did manage to pin him down for a meeting, Lydia would inevitably be there. If I suggested meeting alone, Ethan would protest, saying, "We're a team now. Riley, she's my future." And when we did meet, every single interaction felt staged. If I started a serious conversation, say about refinancing or the college fund, Lydia would find a way to interrupt, turning the focus to a prop, a sudden, "ooh, perfect lighting" moment, transforming my private concern into background noise for her next story. Every genuine connection was systematically corrupted by the presence of a rolling camera. The transactional nature of our relationship, which I had initiated out of love, was weaponized. When Ethan had a minor but expensive fender bender, I, as always, immediately transferred the money for the repairs and the deductible within hours. Lydia posted a celebratory story thanking an imaginary entity. "So grateful for the car company sponsoring our new chapter. They're taking care of everything for Ethan." No mention of my wire transfer, no tag for me, just a fictional brand narrative where she was the key benefactor and Ethan was the passively supported partner. My role had been reduced to an invisible ATM, with Lydia acting as the charismatic front of house who claimed the tips. The real confrontation, the moment the narrative officially flipped, happened one stressful evening when I was trying to talk to Ethan about setting up his own 401k plan. Lydia was sitting opposite me, cross-legged, impeccably composed, while Ethan fidgeted next to her. She looked at me, her face losing its influencer softness and hardening into something cold and managerial. "Look, Riley," she said, cutting right through my financial advice. "Your money is making Ethan uncomfortable. He feels like you have leverage over him. He's a grown man. Grown men need to stand on their own 2 feet. The word leverage echoed in the silence. It wasn't about him being grateful. It was about him feeling controlled. I turned to Ethan, desperate for him to defend me, to correct her obvious manipulation. "Ethan, is that true? Do you feel controlled because I help you with the mortgage and insurance?" Ethan did not meet my eyes. He looked down at the worn edge of the coffee table, the same table he had done his high school homework on. He remained completely silent, allowing Lydia's toxic reinterpretation to stand as the truth. He let her continue, uninterrupted, painting me as the villain who used money to maintain a tight grip on his adult life. The gaslighting was no longer subtle. It was a brazen joint performance. Slowly, methodically, Lydia started phasing me out of Ethan's milestones. When Ethan landed a major promotion at his tech company, the small gathering was planned by Lydia and I only found out about it through a group text sent late that afternoon. placing me at the tail end of the guest list. His birthday party? I was told the wrong time, arriving an hour late to a scene already wrapped up, with the cake already cut. The message was clear. I was not essential. I was not priority. I was merely the inconvenient, emotional baggage that needed to be managed and minimized. The final, wrenching conversation came when I cornered Ethan alone, demanding to know why he was allowing this slow, painful exile. He kept his tone low, almost pleading, but his words were devastating. I just want to breathe, Riley. I don't want anyone, not even you, to keep bringing up the sacrifices you made. I need space to feel like my life is mine. I need to be seen as my own man, not your charity case. Sacrifices had become a dirty word. My years of dedication had been redefined as a suffocating burden, and my love as an intrusive form of emotional supervision. I started to see my role with stark, painful clarity. I was no longer his sister, his primary family, or his emotional anchor. I was merely the transfer account operating quietly in the background, a financial ghost funding a life that now actively excluded me. The fundamental relationship had been perverted. The one who had saved him was now labeled toxic and controlling, while the one who was completely dependent on that sacrifice, Ethan, was being celebrated as a shining example of a self-made man. All thanks to the carefully constructed PR campaign of his fiancée, the role reversal was complete, and I was left standing outside the story I had funded and written. The chilling finality of Lydia's voice on the phone, "You should just let go," didn't spark tears. It sparked action. I couldn't process the betrayal through grief. I needed physical proof that this was real, that my brother was actually standing next to his new wife, agreeing to cast me out. That night, a cold, miserable Portland rain was falling, a dreary, persistent drizzle that slicked the asphalt and made the Beaverton sidewalks treacherous. The yellow streetlights bled into the wet pavement, casting long, distorted shadows. I drove straight to the townhouse I owned, the house I had protected for him. I knocked hard, not once or twice, but 3 sharp, insistent raps. The door only opened a sliver. Lydia stood there, blocking the entrance completely. Behind her, in the dim hallway, I could make out stacked wedding gifts, a couple of untouched suitcases, and a wilting bouquet of white flowers, the relics of a party I hadn't been invited to. My eyes immediately locked onto her hand. She was holding her phone low, casually, but the camera app was open, angled slightly upward. I realized with a jolt of icy horror that I was walking into a pre-staged scene. The confrontation, my raw, legitimate pain, was being recorded, possibly streamed, certainly saved for future content. "I need to speak to Ethan, alone," I said, my voice barely a whisper, fighting to remain steady. Lydia didn't move. Her posture was rigid, proprietary. "He doesn't need you. Riley, your negative energy. This is his new family now, and it doesn't include people who drag him down." Then, Ethan appeared. He was wearing a rumpled button-down shirt, probably the same one he'd worn for his after-party photos. He looked tired, worn, and he refused to meet my gaze. He stood slightly behind Lydia, failing to offer the most basic courtesy, a sister's invitation across the threshold of the home I paid for. The tension was palpable, and it wasn't just us. I noticed a curtain twitch across the street, and the faint glow of a neighbor's phone light near the window of the house next door. Lydia was not just filming for her followers. She was staging a spectacle for the neighborhood. Seeing the opportunity, Lydia raised her voice, ensuring everyone within earshot heard her performance. "If you truly love him, Riley, you'll sign the deed over to us, and the Europe Fund too. Just call it a wedding gift. It's time for him to be an independent man." I stared at the sheer audacity, the blatant demand for $500,000 worth of assets, all delivered under the thin guise of love. I asked him, ignoring her, trying one last time to reach the brother I knew. "Ethan, look at me. Do you honestly think I control you with money?" He shifted his weight, flicked a quick, nervous glance at Lydia, and then directed his gaze at me, cold and distant. I just want a life where you aren't interfering. I need space. Interfering, in that single, damning word, my 15 years of being his sole guardian, his financial lifeline, his emotional safety net, was reduced to a petty inconvenience. It was like pulling the pin on a grenade. The explosion of every stored emotion, every late night, every canceled date, every exhausted tear, it all came back as interference. Lydia stepped forward, her victorious smile unsettlingly bright under the porch light. Her phone was still aimed. "Grown-ups handle their own responsibilities, Riley, and if you don't give us what we need, we'll still be fine. We don't need your pity money." Her eyes were daring me, challenging me to make a scene, daring me to prove her point that I was the controlling harpy she had painted me to be. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just turned my back, feeling the oppressive weight of my role, the caregiver, the provider, the interferer, lift away. I walked stiffly to the building's small, cheap elevator, the rain instantly plastering my hair to my forehead. As the doors slid shut, I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide and bloodshot, but there were no tears. Instead, there was a shocking, icy calm. I realized I wasn't grieving the loss of my brother. I was experiencing the profound, quiet relief of a person who had just decided to step away from a collapsing wall, a wall they had been holding up for half their life. They wanted me out of their story? Fine, but I was the author, and I was about to delete the entire chapter they were built upon. I got back to my own apartment, the rain washing away the grime of the city, but unable to touch the cold, hard clarity that had settled inside me. I didn't bother changing out of my damp clothes. Instead, I went straight to my laptop. The emotional breakdown could wait. The surgery needed to be performed immediately. I opened a fresh spreadsheet, the digital equivalent of a surgical table. I began to itemize, going back through 15 years of bank statements, tax documents, and digital receipts. This wasn't a task fueled by rage, but by the dispassionate necessity of an accountant closing an extremely delinquent ledger. I listed everything: the initial down payment on the Beaverton townhouse, the 7 years of monthly mortgage payments I had covered or subsidized, the annual car insurance premiums, the registration fees, the quarterly utility bills I had silently maintained under my name, the credit card debt I'd cleared when he was struggling in college, the accumulated balance of the Europe Tech Fund. The number that populated the final cell was staggering, even to me, who had been living it. The total amount of direct financial support, property equity, and unrepaid investment in Ethan Sharp's life surpassed $450,000. I sat there, staring at the figure. Over $450,000 of my own career, my own deferred dreams, reduced to a single, cold, black number. I didn't cry. There was only a raw, exposed feeling of truth, a terrifying, final lucidity. I had invested more in his life than I had in my own retirement. The next step was not emotional. It was legal. I picked up the phone and called Ava Morell, my real estate attorney, the woman who had handled the townhouse purchase 6 years prior. She was a no-nonsense professional, and I needed her clinical detachment. "Ava, I need to know the absolute legal truth about the property at the Beaverton address. Who is on the deed? Who is on the mortgage? And what rights does Ethan Sharp have?" Ava's reply was instantaneous. "Riley, you know this. You are the sole title holder, the sole borrower. Ethan has no legal claim, no tenancy rights beyond being a guest you permitted to occupy the property. Why?" "Because the permission has been revoked," I stated, the words clipped and sharp. I laid out my instructions with precision. First, Ava was to immediately prepare the paperwork to formally dissolve the Europe Tech Fund and transfer all accumulated cash, a figure nearing $25,000, into a separate, protected account, legally unreachable by Ethan. Second, I instructed her to begin the process of selling the Beaverton townhouse immediately. "I want it listed today. Ava, cash buyers only, fast close. I want them out of there in less than 30 days. "Ava, after a moment of stunned silence, confirmed the housing market in that quadrant of Portland was hot. A quick sale was probable. That meant Ethan and Lydia's entire physical foundation would dissolve in a matter of weeks, reduced to packing boxes and a notice to vacate. The next thing to be dismantled was the illusion of their comfort. I remembered the email from 3 months ago, the one about their dream honeymoon to Hawaii that Ethan had casually mentioned. Assuming Lydia would finance it, I had secretly used my travel points and my corporate discount to book a lavish 10-day trip for them, intending to present it as a surprise gift after the wedding. A final, generous act. The entire bill was sitting on my corporate card. I accessed the booking confirmation. I called the high-end travel agency and requested the cancellation. Since I was within the agency's grace period, I recovered the majority of the cost, taking the $300 cancellation fee as a small, bitter tuition payment for my own naive generosity. Their planned escape route was gone. Then came the tedious, necessary cutting of the umbilical cord. I opened my banking portal and meticulously reviewed every single automated payment tied to Ethan's life. I went through the list: the monthly car insurance policy, the internet service, the premium streaming subscriptions he enjoyed, the electricity bill, his gym membership, even the automatic refill for his contact lenses. For every single one, I removed my credit card details, changing the payment status to pending new account holder. If they wanted to be independent adults, they could start by learning how fast the power company cuts off service when the bill goes unpaid for 2 weeks. My final act that night was the most difficult, because it involved direct communication. I opened my text message app, the same thread where I had last sent him money for car repairs, and typed out a single, definitive message. You told me you wanted a life without my interference. I agree. Effective immediately. I am withdrawing all financial support, property access, and assistance. I hit send. Then, I didn't wait for a reply. I blocked both Ethan's and Lydia's numbers. I disabled my social media accounts. I powered down the phone completely and set it aside. I walked out onto my small apartment balcony. The Portland rain had eased to a fine, misty spray. I looked out over the skyline, the same lights that had served as the backdrop for his wedding photos. I didn't feel rage or sadness. I felt a profound, almost weightless relief. For the first time since I was 21, I was not holding my breath, waiting for the next emergency. I had stopped trying to save someone who had explicitly chosen to drown. The silence that followed my text message was absolute, broken only by the clinical chime of my work email. I kept my phone off, the black rectangle a symbol of my new, self-imposed isolation. I had initiated the cutting, and now I simply waited for the domino effect to begin. It took only a few days for the first satisfying thud. My realtor, a savvy woman named Jenna, emailed me on Thursday morning. The subject line was succinct: cash offer, Beaverton townhouse. Accept? The offer was significantly higher than the already ambitious asking price, and the buyer was an investment group wanting a fast close in possession in less than 30 days. I didn't hesitate. I electronically signed the acceptance immediately, sending the confirmation back to Jenna with a single word: done. The machine was moving. In Beaverton, the new reality started arriving in Ethan's mailbox. The property management company, following legal protocol for a change of ownership, sent official notification to the current occupants about the impending change. Attached were separate envelopes containing the bills I had uncoupled: the new, actual rate for the high-speed internet, the suddenly high electricity bill, the insurance renewal notice. All were addressed directly to Ethan Sharp, with the bold print warnings about late payments and immediate cancellation. The comfortable, subsidized life he had been living, shielded by my automatic payments and legal name, had been violently exposed. The first ripple of their personal disaster was relayed to me not by Ethan, but by our few remaining mutual friends. One friend, Kate, messaged me a screenshot of Lydia's latest Instagram story. The image was a dramatic black-and-white selfie of Lydia, her eyes puffy, her pout carefully angled. The caption was pure, unadulterated performance art. Betrayed by the very family I married into, some people only want to drag you down. She was explicitly trying to pivot the narrative into a newlywed tragedy where I was the wicked older sister. But the comment section was already turning toxic. Underneath the carefully crafted pity was a blunt, real-world question from an anonymous account. Didn't that house always belong to your husband's sister? Another account, obviously a local internet detective, quickly dug up public property records. A new wave of comments followed, pointing out the indisputable fact. The title was in Riley Sharp's name. The entire carefully constructed story of the self-made man and the house we built from the ground up was exposed as a lucrative fantasy built on my bank account. Lydia, the celebrated lifestyle guru, was being revealed as an opportunistic squatter. The financial consequences were swift and merciless. The second wave of the domino effect, brand partnerships, built entirely on the aspirational image of stability and ownership, started to dissolve. The first brand, a popular meal prep service, quietly archived all content featuring Lydia and the townhouse. Then came the second, and the third. Her follower count began its steady, visible descent, and her comment section was flooded not with heart-eye emojis, but with angry, disillusioned questions. How much of your life is actually real? How many thousands of dollars did you lie about? While their world was collapsing in a frenzy of canceled deals and digital shame, my own life was finally, gloriously expanding. I funneled all my focus into my career. I was leading a major, high-stakes digital campaign at my agency, a project that required 70-hour weeks and absolute concentration. For the first time, my career decisions weren't balanced against Ethan's needs. My energy wasn't siphoned off by family crisis. My boss, impressed by my newfound, laser-like focus and successful early results, put me on the shortlist for a department director role in the next 6 months. My professional ascent was in direct proportion to my brother's fall. The third wave was Ethan's collapse. His constant need for time off, ostensibly for wedding preparations and content creation, had already made his performance at the tech firm shaky. When the personal scandal of the house and the public drama hit, his productivity tanked completely. I heard indirectly that he was called into HR. His repeated absences and flagging output cited, he was let go, officially for not being a good fit for the company culture. The self-made man who needed to stand on his own 2 feet was now unemployed and homeless, all within a matter of 3 weeks. The bills I had decoupled started hitting his unemployed bank account like punches. Without the high-paying tech job, and with Lydia's income, now rapidly shrinking due to brand pullbacks, the symbolic rent, the insurance, and the debt he had accrued living up to his influencer partner's standards became crushing. The messages from friends became increasingly desperate, filled with screenshots of Lydia's new, pathetic attempts at content. She tried to pivot to healing after betrayal by in-laws, posting tearful videos that only drew more accusations and ridicule. Ethan, meanwhile, was reportedly freaking out over the massive, unpayable bill for the car insurance that was already 2 weeks overdue. The final piece of their self-destruction was the public, toxic unraveling of their relationship. I was sent a quick, shaky video clip from an anonymous neighborhood account, showing Ethan and Lydia screaming at each other in the townhouse driveway. Lydia was shouting about how he couldn't provide for an influencer standard, and Ethan was slamming his hand against the wall. I watched the short, painful clip, the frantic desperation in their voices. Then, I closed the video. I didn't reply to the friend who sent it. I didn't rush to call the insurance company. I simply logged back into my work system, preparing for a 4 p.m. conference call. I had spent my entire adult life being the first responder, the one who rushed in to put out the fire. Now, for the first time, I was choosing to remain firmly on the outside, observing the inevitable consequences of their choices. I had given them the life they claimed they wanted, a life without my interference, and now they were forced to live in the crumbling house they had tried to steal. The final, ugly details of their implosion arrived piecemeal, confirming that the structural integrity of their relationship was as fake as Lydia's carefully filtered skin tone. The talk about Lydia being overly friendly with a local photographer, a guy who specialized in dramatic, moody portraiture, started as whispers in a mutual friend group chat. Soon, photographic evidence emerged. Blurry shots, taken at a discreet angle, showing Lydia and the photographer seated far too close in a dimly lit, small hotel bar in Astoria, a coastal town a couple of hours away. Another friend forwarded me a screenshot of Lydia's public check-in. On location shooting day! But the background of the accompanying photo clearly showed the generic beige carpet and heavy curtains of a low-budget hotel room, not a professional studio. The comments section erupted in disbelief, asking the obvious, pointed question: where's your husband? The final, physical rupture was captured by an actual security camera. A neighbor in the townhouse complex forwarded a grainy video to the residents' group, showing a full-blown screaming match between Ethan and Lydia outside the front door. Lydia's voice was high-pitched and hysterical, accusing him of being a financial failure. Ethan, desperate and beaten, was filmed slamming his fist against the exterior wall I owned. Within an hour of the footage spreading, Lydia's sleek black SUV was seen pulling out of the driveway, loaded with her expensive clothes, her filming equipment, and most of the jointly acquired, influencer-grade furniture. She was gone, leaving him not just alone, but submerged in debt. Around that time, I received the email from Ava Morell. The subject line was succinct and final. Townhouse sale completed. Funds transferred. The house was officially closed. The money, nearly $500,000, sitting safely in my account, the largest lump sum I had ever seen. Simultaneously, Ethan received the official final notification to vacate the premises within 3 weeks. Ethan was now unemployed, facing immediate eviction, and holding a stack of bills. The problem was his credit cards, which he had maxed out over the past year, trying to keep up with Lydia's aspirational lifestyle, fine dining, expensive clothes for content, and lavish trips. Since they were legally married, half of that marital debt, thousands and thousands of dollars, now rested squarely on his shoulders, with no income to back it up. Then came the call. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of a major presentation to my leadership team, outlining the strategy for the next quarter. My phone, which I'd forgotten to set to Do Not Disturb, buzzed aggressively, not once, but continuously. From an unknown number, I ignored it, staying professional, delivering my analysis on budget and market trends. During the 10-minute coffee break, however, a strange, powerful instinct made me check the missed calls. 19 missed calls from the same, unfamiliar number, against my better judgment. A deep residual cord of responsibility tugged at me. I stepped into a quiet stairwell and returned the call. The voice on the other end was unmistakably Ethan, but it was raw, choked, and ragged. He didn't scream or yell. He simply broke. "Riley, it's me. Please don't hang up. Please." The dam burst. In a rush of fragmented, sobbing sentences, he confessed. Lydia had run off with the photographer, leaving him with the mountain of debt. His car had been towed by the city the day before for expired insurance, the exact insurance I had stopped paying. The new owner of the townhouse was demanding possession, and he literally had nowhere to go. "I'm sorry, Riley," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I let her turn you into the bad guy. I know now. You're the only family I have left. Just let me crash on your sofa for a few weeks. I'll get a job. I promise I'll pay you back. I just need a restart." I leaned my head against the cold, concrete stairwell wall. The years flashed before me. The sterile hospital lights, the cold rented room, the double shifts, the constant, low-grade fear of failure, the $450,000 spent to keep him safe. If I said yes, the cycle would immediately, irrevocably restart. I would rescue. He would depend. He would resent. And he would eventually leave again, taking a piece of my life with him. This was my moment of ultimate moral choice. To choose the comfortable, familiar path of self-sacrifice or the terrifying, necessary path of self-preservation? I took a deep breath, letting the icy finality of my decision resonate in my bones. I spoke slowly, deliberately, each word clear and devoid of emotion. No, Ethan, you told me you wanted a life without my interference. You have it now. This is not punishment. This is simply the consequence of your own actions and your own choices. I am not your life raft anymore. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't listen to the choked sob on the other end. I pressed the end call button and silenced the phone completely. My hand, to my own surprise, was completely steady. I had finally fully cut the cord. After ending the call with Ethan, I didn't rush back to my team presentation. I stayed in the cold, echoing stairwell, and for the first time since my parents died, I allowed myself to fully break down. I didn't cry for Ethan's pain. I cried for my own lost youth, for the 15 years that had been steadily consumed by the fire of obligation. I cried for the 21-year-old girl who thought the only way to survive was to become someone else's savior. It was a cleansing, exhausted grief that finally left me feeling hollowed out and ready to rebuild. The money from the townhouse sale, a hefty sum of nearly $500,000, was the catalyst for my new life. I didn't use it to upgrade to a bigger, flashier house, the kind of property Lydia would have envied. Instead, I chose deliberate simplicity. I purchased a small, sun-drenched condo in a clean, high-rise building closer to downtown Portland, just enough space for one person and a few carefully chosen potted plants. It was minimalist, bright, and most importantly, free from the ghosts of my past responsibility. It was a life tailored for one. The real work, however, was internal. I started going to therapy twice a week. Through those quiet, necessary conversations, I began to unravel the core belief that had governed my life. The idea that my self-worth was directly tied to my usefulness to Ethan. I learned that my unconditional sacrifice was, in fact, a deeply ingrained coping mechanism, a way to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of living a life solely for myself. The fear of being alone, of not being needed, had driven me to become his entire world. I actively sought out new connections. I joined a weekend hiking group, exploring the dense, green trails outside the city. I met people who didn't know my history, who didn't know I had a brother. I learned how to tell my story without starting every introduction with the self-effacing qualifier. I raised my brother for 15 years. That burden, once my entire identity, was finally relegated to a closed chapter. At the agency, my career soared. Free from the constant distraction and emotional drain of Ethan's crises, I was fully present, fully powerful. The successful campaign I had led earlier led to my immediate promotion to Director of Content Strategy, a position that came with a salary increase and the promise of more control. For the first time, my professional achievements were not an aside to my family life. They were the main event. I realized I couldn't, in good conscience, keep the accumulated Europe Tech Fund money, the $25,000 I had originally saved for Ethan. It was tainted by the betrayal. Instead of spending it on myself, I quietly established the Sharp Scholarship Fund at a local community college, specifically earmarked for students pursuing technology degrees who had been orphaned or were aging out of the foster care system. The legal terms were ironclad. No current member of my biological family was eligible to receive it. It was my final, productive severing of that specific financial cord, and Ethan would never even know it existed. News of Ethan drifted back occasionally, filtered through distant acquaintances. He was bouncing between couches, staying with a college friend here, a sympathetic former colleague there. He was doing part-time delivery work, slowly, quietly looking for a new job, and reportedly never mentioned Lydia's name. I didn't seek him out. I had not blocked his original number again after the final call, but I didn't search for it. I didn't look up Lydia's disgraced social media accounts. I simply accepted the new reality. Distance was the only healthy form of love left. My love for him had not died, but it had been restructured, wrapped in boundaries and limits I should have established 10 years ago. One mild afternoon, walking past the massive stone columns of Portland State University, I watched a group of students laughing, carefree, clutching their backpacks, entirely oblivious to the monumental debt and responsibility that awaited them. I suddenly understood the magnitude of what I had lost. My entire 20s had been lived in perpetual anxiety and financial fear, a life on hold. I made a silent vow to myself. My 30s and 40s would be different. They would be mine. I genuinely believed the story was quietly concluding, fading into the comfortable, ordinary rhythm of my self-directed life. I was safe, healed, and moving forward. Until the day I received the formal, thick envelope in the mail, bearing the embossed seal of a prominent Portland law firm, addressed to Riley Sharp. It was a letter demanding representation for Ethan, pulling me back to face one final, unavoidable confrontation. The letter arrived 3 months after I had cut him off, a stark reminder that some people only respect the legal documents you wave at them. It came from a small, aggressive law firm, representing Ethan Sharp. The letter demanded equitable negotiation regarding the sale of the townhouse and the alleged distribution of the Europe Fund, arguing that both were commingled assets built on the basis of familial commitment. In short, Ethan was attempting to legally claim that my sacrifice was a joint investment. Ava Morell, my attorney, reviewed the document and scoffed. He's grasping at straws. Riley. But to close this chapter completely, let's meet them once. We'll expose the weakness of his claim and ensure he doesn't waste any more of your time. The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday afternoon in a sterile, small conference room high up in a downtown Portland office tower. Ethan walked in looking defeated. He was gaunt, his eyes sunken, and he was wearing an ill-fitting, cheap suit that looked rented. Beside him was a nervous young lawyer clutching a thin folder, a stark contrast to the thick binder Ava carried. Ethan started the conversation, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I might hear genuine contrition. Riley, I am truly sorry for how things ended. I was wrong about Lydia, and I was wrong about you. But the apology quickly pivoted, hardening into a tone of entitled demand. But that house, and that Europe Fund, I dedicated my entire adult life planning around them. I put in emotional investment, an effort to maintain the illusion of a stable life there. I'm just asking for a fair share of the equity and the savings. For the future I was promised. I waited for him to finish. When he fell silent, I calmly pushed a thick folder across the mahogany table. It wasn't full of accusations. It was full of receipts. Ethan, I said, my voice level and controlled, this is a chronological record. It contains the original deed, showing my sole ownership. It contains the 15 years of utility, insurance, and maintenance bills paid directly from my accounts. It includes the email chain from 7 years ago where I authorized your high school's emergency tuition payment, and it includes notarized statements from the banks detailing the mortgage payments. There was no commingled asset here. There was only a unilateral transfer of funds from me to you. The young lawyer immediately looked uncomfortable, flipping quickly through the overwhelming stack of evidence. The claim was falling apart before it even began. Then, I delivered the final blow, the twist he couldn't have anticipated. I slid a single, crisp legal document across the table. It was the incorporation document for the new scholarship fund. As for the Europe Fund, I continued, meeting his eye without flinching, that money, the $25,000, no longer exists for personal use. It has been legally transferred into the Sharp Scholarship Fund for orphan students entering tech fields. Ethan stared at the paper, his mouth slightly open. You took away my opportunity, he whispered, the realization hitting him hard. No, I corrected him softly. You threw away that opportunity on the day you chose to believe that everything you had was self-made, and that I was nothing more than a burden to be shoved aside. That opportunity now belongs to children who genuinely have no older sister to sacrifice her entire life for them. Ethan's lawyer, realizing the futility and danger of pursuing a losing case, began to advise him in a low, urgent tone. Continuing to sue would likely result in Ethan having to pay my legal and court fees. a financial disaster given his current unemployment and credit card debt. The last question Ethan asked me wasn't about money or the house. It was quiet, pathetic, and filled with the profound terror of utter isolation. Do you ever want me to be family again? The question was the final flicker of the bridge he had burned. It wasn't about the cash. It was about the realization that he had willfully broken the only safety net he had ever known. I looked straight at my brother, the man I had raised and lost. I chose my final words with care, not as a sister, but as an adult, setting a permanent boundary. Family doesn't humiliate the person who raised them for camera clicks. From today forward, I am no longer your oxygen. If, one day, you learn how to breathe entirely on your own without stepping on anyone else, then maybe we can talk again, as two separate, grown-up people. I stood up, gathering my files. I didn't look back at the broken man I left in the conference room. I simply walked out, into the bright afternoon sunlight of downtown Portland, blending into the flow of people who were all moving forward, living their own lives. My story closed with the image of me, walking straight into the sun, finally living a life that belonged only to me, leaving behind a long, heavy chapter of emotional debt, and never looking back. Thank you so much for listening to Riley's journey. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from, and what your thoughts are on Riley's final choice. Don't forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Smash that like button, and hit the hype button to make sure Riley's story is heard by even more people.